10 minutes, thanks. 10 minutes, everyone. Righto.
We belong to the land. From where we came, we shall return. The land gave us life. Life is the land. This is where we stand. The land is my mother. She gave birth to the spirits and all things. The spirits are one with us in all things. She gave us the heavens and the powers to see its wonders, to hear its earthly calls. Our life is harmony. To have no harmony, there is no life. We belong to the land. From where we came, we shall return.
I don't look at myself as being a big star or any celebrity or any of that. I'm very down to earth, you know, simple person. And for me, what I'm doing is for my people. It's not for me, it's for my people and for our children and for their children.
The sun came up this morning. I was empty in my soul. The child that I had mothered is here no more. Life was taken from the body to save him from a living hell. Well, I heard a whisper, we'll survive. Just before he reached his cell, I said, Lord, if you take him away, I don't want to live another day. I said, my child is being taken away. I don't want to live. I said, my child is dead. I don't want to live. I said, my child is being taken away. I don't.
Good evening. Flying around the world as much as we do, we tend to overlook the possibility that unforeseen circumstances might dramatically terminate the flight. One of the most unpredictable forces in nature that plays havoc with aircraft is called wind shear. Tonight, on Towards 2000, we'll look at a new method of detecting this invisible force. We'll be looking at how digital imaging is manipulating photographs without leaving any evidence behind. I'll be taking a trip in an extraordinary diving suit that maintains normal atmospheric pressure inside, even at great depths. And for the younger viewers, new computer software enabling you to do your own programming. They're just some of the reports on Towards 2000 tonight. But first, an inexpensive solution to the problem of building.
This is Bankstown in Sydney, a small piece of suburban Australian heartland. As Australia is one of the most urban societies in the world, it also has one of the highest rates of home ownership. But here in suburbia, we still build our houses out of fairly conventional and traditional materials. Bricks and mortar, weatherboard, even fibro. But there are a number of interesting alternatives gaining popularity, particularly in the country, such things as mud brick houses. The big drawback, though, with mud brick is the time it takes if you're making them yourself. It can mean months of back-breaking labour. But now all that is changing. Well, this is the Terra Firma pressed earth block-making machine. It was developed in the American state of New Mexico in order to provide low-cost housing for poor communities. It's a computer-controlled machine that can churn out some 700 blocks, pressed earth blocks an hour. That's about one every 5 or 6 seconds. Well, as you can see, it's a really big, solid, compressed block. And even though it's still damp, it can be laid immediately. And because of its thermal mass, it's quite a bit bigger than a conventional brick, as you can see, about 4 times bigger. It has excellent insulating qualities. It's also more fireproof and more soundproof than even a double cavity brick wall. And they're cheaper, about between 40 and 60 cents per block, depending on the site, for something this size, which is about the equivalent of about 4 bricks. Another important feature is that the earth from which your house is built can come from the same land, providing you with part of the excavation which might be necessary for the house, or perhaps a hole for either a swimming pool or a dam. Well, it's a fairly straightforward setup, really. This is the generator that provides the electrical power for it. This is the petrol tank to run the main engine. This is a hydraulic fuel tank here, and a refrigeration system here which cools the hydraulic fluid. Then you've got the main hydraulic system here which drives the compressing rams that are operating there. And then in here, a Ford industrial engine which runs the whole thing. Well, when this is all full with earth, it holds the equivalent of about 60 blocks. And as you can see, it's just starting to move underneath. There's a conveyor belt underneath here which takes the earth up and drops it into this hopper at the end. Well, there's normally a guard over this, but just to show you what happens, the hopper at the back is where the earth drops down into the molds. This is the compressing ram which pushes the earth down with a force of about 100 tons. Nothing happens to it in this particular position. And then as it comes around here, the other ram forces it out.
The machine was brought out to Australia by 2 friends, Gordon Smith and Michael Wright, an American who's been living here since the mid-60s and whose brother invented and developed it in the United States.
Well, he wrote to me and told me he'd come up with some revolutionary idea of how to build houses cheaper, and I've always been interested in, you know, any cheaper methods are got to be the better method, so.
We just got together and thought that it was about time that we'd flown over the States and seen the machine running and done our homework on the machine, and then we decided we'd bring it to Australia.
Where does it go from here?
Well, basically, we're setting up franchise throughout Australia and Southeast Asia, New Zealand, New Guinea, and just playing it by ear, just as it comes in.
The machine's been working virtually non-stop since it was imported into Australia, with some quite impressive results, like this private home near Gosford in New South Wales. Several large Australian organisations, such as state housing commissions and the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, have expressed interest in the machine. But possibly the greatest potential lies in third world countries, which would benefit enormously from cheap, strong building blocks like these. The Australian agents are working with the American designers to try and improve and develop the machine, tailoring it more specifically to the needs of underdeveloped countries in Africa, the Middle East and Asia, where possibly hundreds, maybe thousands of machines like this could be used.
It was July 9th, 1982, in New Orleans, during the peak of the thunderstorm season, that a Pan Am World Airways jet roared down the runway, took flight just briefly, and then crashed a few seconds later, killing all 145 persons on board. That crash is now considered to be one of at least 10 in the United States in the past decade, attributable to a phenomenon known as wind shear microbursts. And here in Colorado, at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, those sudden changes in wind speed and direction are being studied. It's already been concluded that there is no large passenger aircraft flying that's capable of passing through some microbursts. Specifically, a microburst is an intense, localized downdraft of wind. An aircraft entering a microburst would first experience a headwind, increasing lift, and only seconds later, a strong tailwind, which dangerously reduces a plane's speed. The phenomenon occurs primarily during thunderstorms, but until recently, there was no known way of detecting a microburst. But scientists in Colorado working on a $2 million project called the Joint Airport Weather Studies, or JAWS, have used this to study microbursts. Once the initial discovery of microbursts was made, the National Center for Atmospheric Research then set about finding a means of identifying those sudden shifts in wind direction. And this is what they arrived at, the Doppler radar. And the acoustics are unusual in here because the radar is housed in an almost perfect dome. The Doppler radar is a relatively new instrument in the study of the weather. It works by sending out microwaves which bounce off raindrops or snowflakes and return to the radar dish. It's so sensitive, in fact, that it can even detect a bee at a distance of about 160 kilometers. It can tell what direction the bee is flying in and how fast. And because of the microwaves bouncing on raindrops or snowflakes, it can also provide this information about the wind. During a thunderstorm, the Doppler radar is activated. Data gathered by the radar, which peers inside thunderstorms and observes the wind movement, can be stored on video disc and replayed at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. For the first time, scientists can observe the birth and death of a wind shear microburst. This may just look like a rather confusing set of color images, but to a meteorologist, it's now known that these images represent a wind shear microburst. If you can imagine the Doppler radar dome about 5 kilometers off the screen, then this image is a survey of an area between about 20 and 35 kilometers away from the dome. And right in the center of the screen here is the microburst. This mass of blue here represents a volume of wind rushing towards the radar dome. And here, this green volume is wind rushing away from the dome. In the center, we've got the very strong downdraft of wind. Now, all of this conflicting wind velocity and direction is happening in an area only about 6 kilometres wide and probably at an altitude of below 1,000 feet or so. So what happens when an aircraft flies through a microburst like this? The first thing the pilot's going to experience with this green block is a very strong headwind. It will lift the nose of the aircraft, increasing its altitude and its airspeed. The pilot's response to that will be to throttle back to try and reduce altitude and reduce speed. But only seconds later, the pilot will hit this area, the strong downdraft, and then a strong tailwind. That will tip up the tail of the aircraft, reduce its altitude, and reduce its speed. Now, just over a few seconds then, the pilot's only a few hundred feet from the ground, and the end result of flying through a microburst like this is almost certainly a tragic one. At Stapleton International Airport here in Denver, wind shear microburst detectors developed as a result of the JAWS project have been stationed at strategic points around the airfield. At this airport, an aircraft is taking off or landing every 30 seconds. And during the thunderstorm season, the danger of microburst cannot be ignored. It's hoped that in the future, most major airports around the world will be able to detect microbursts before it's too late.
Since the invention of the aqualung, there have been increasing scientific and economic incentives for divers to start operating at greater ocean depths. Well, here at the College of Oceaneering in Wilmington, California, these experienced scuba divers are being trained to become saturation divers. They're being trained to be comfortable and to work comfortably in a hostile and alien environment. Literally, they become astronauts in inner space. Deep sea saturation diving is by no means a cushy career. They work at those depths under enormous hazards: oxygen poisoning, decompression sickness, hypothermia. The hypothermia is caused by the fact that they have to breathe this helium-oxygen mixture, and helium has a conductivity factor of about 6 times that of normal air. So as they're exhaling, they're losing an enormous amount of body or core temperature. To counteract that, they pump warmed helium down to the diver and also warmed water into the suit, which of course is the perfect environment for fungi and bacteria to proliferate. So on these long diving sessions, they have epidemics of ear infections.
And for all that, the saturation diver can only spend 1.5 hours per month at 300 metres. The cost for the decompression chamber and support team runs to $100,000 for the same period. There had to be a better way.
Well, this is JIM. It's an atmospheric diving suit, and it's the engineering solution to the physiological problems of deep sea saturation diving. It's called an atmospheric diving suit because irrespective of the depth that the diver is operating at, be it 50 metres or 500 metres, he continually remains at atmospheric pressure. And I suppose the most important thing is about this system that it really is a bathysphere with arms and legs, and that is that it is able to articulate its arms and legs despite the crushing pressure that it's on by an ingenious use of an incompressible oil fluid in these joints. This Jim's got quite a pedigree. I mean, he looks a bit like a robot, a cross between a robot and a panda bear, but this suit has dived all around the world into ocean trenches, and including working under the oil fields in the North Sea in force 6 gales, and they would be conditions that would be totally prohibitive to saturation divers. And once a diver becomes proficient with this suit, they literally can walk upstairs or tie knots with these manipulators. Well, to give you some idea of the enormous pressures that Jim would encounter at 2,000 feet or 600 metres, on this faceplate alone, it would have 20,000 kilos of pressure on it. That's like parking 3 semi-trailers on your face. Now, if anything should happen in that sort of inky murk, the diver operator can disconnect himself from these weights here and disconnect himself from the umbilical tether and pop to the surface to safety. But hopefully nothing like that's going to happen today, because I'm going to be checked out on Jim by Dick Clark, who's the chief ADS instructor here at the College of Oceaneering. So nothing like that's going to happen today, is it, Dick?
Certainly not. It's never happened before, and we don't expect it to happen today.
So what do I do? We have to get in and take the head off first.
What we're going to do, give you your first introductory dive in the gym suit today. We'll get your sea legs. First of all, we'll get the dome off, get you inside, give you the pre-dive check as we do for each and every dive.
So we put the thing on the top. Okay, so I just get in.
Jim has its own life support system and a backup which will supply air for a further 72 hours.
Point your toes, ease yourself on in. Looking good.
It's a very tight fit. Ah!
But one can't help having a little apprehension. Once you get into Jim, you can't get out until you're retrieved to the surface. But you are in constant contact via an oral nasal mask. It's a combination breathing mask with a small microphone attached. Jim got its name from Jim Jarrett, a famous diver of the 1930s who dived in an armoured suit to the wreck of the Lusitania. The man who designed that suit was a consultant on the atmospheric diving suit project. The first Jim suit was produced in the late 1970s, but they've undergone continual improvement. Fashioned from cast magnesium, they'd still be impossible to walk around in on land. They weigh in at around 500 kilos. But the volume of the suit is calculated so that it displaces slightly more water than it actually weighs, making it positively buoyant. Then external weights are added to the exterior of the suit to make it 25 kilograms negatively buoyant, dependent on bottom conditions. And those conditions could fluctuate dramatically.
I think to go down in Jim, you'd have to have a tremendous amount of confidence in the manufacture and the backup equipment which is inside. Because once you get down to 2,000 feet, you would be completely alone. It would be very frightening, I would imagine. It's like walking in glue. And the difficulty with walking with it is that you have no sensation of where your feet are. I can't see my feet at all until I fall over. By that time, it's too late.
It takes on average around 30 hours to acclimatise to the Jim suit, but a lot of the physical strain of working in them has now been reduced by the introduction of Jet Jim. This is the latest version of the atmospheric diving suit, with propeller thrusters that take an electrical feed from the surface. They allow the diver to manoeuvre effortlessly on the bottom or in currents. The thrusters are activated by controls in the viewing port, which is now hemispherical for improved vision. Using a computerized depth sensor, virtually an automatic pilot, the diver can position himself at any depth and work without having to readjust the controls.
Oh, boy, and that was quite an experience. I've really worked up quite a sweat in there because it really takes a lot of energy to actually sort of ponderously move around the pool. Once you got over the fear and claustrophobia of working at those sort of great depths, I suppose you could function reasonably well. But I don't think I'd be signing up for the course just immediately anyway.
The rat's pretty scared. That's a strong thing, isn't it?
And that's on Tucky's way.
Most personal computers use a language known as BASIC, and BASIC has been praised for being extremely efficient and very simple. But a new language has been developed that even adults can understand. And here to demonstrate the intricacies of Handy are Sarah, age 10, and Jennifer, age 7. Now, we're going to look at a Dracula movie, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, let's bring up Dracula.
movie time again.
It says, watch the movie Who is Showing a Strong Feeling.
So this is a lesson about feelings as well.
Yes.
The handy language allows interaction between a video disc and the computer, a combination which is ideal for classroom use.
Yes, we're trying to find who is showing a strong feeling. It's gonna come out of the coffin. Whose hand is that? There's a
There's
big
the rat.
rat.
What about Dracula? Do you think he's got strong feelings?
Maybe. Okay.
Okay, now here's the lesson again.
Is it rats?
Okay, this time let's pick the rats.
The rats.
Yes.
Yes.
Rats are scared.
Do you think we've learned something?
Yeah.
The apparent simplicity of the system disguises its complexity. The handy language comprises more than 100,000 characters. That's far more complex than the basic computer language. It was developed by Dr. Don Nix, a child psychologist employed at IBM's Yorktown Heights research facility. He's also the father of Sarah and Jennifer.
Well, the purpose of the language is to be able to have a sophisticated display on the screen where you have multiple objects that can be moved around by themselves, and objects go in front and in back of each other. And in order to do that, from a computer standpoint, you need a very sophisticated underlying program. BASIC itself just doesn't have that sort of power. So if you want a language that has the kind of power to do that, there's a tendency for the language to be difficult for people to use as opposed to computer people. And as a result, you have a discrepancy. So what we try to do is have a language that's very easy to use but still has a lot of power.
The other capacity is that of a software package which appears to allow children to write their own programs. Here, the girls have written a play using a pre-programmed series of visual images.
Now, what's happening?
Still got walking
Eagle, eagle.
This is
Spiffy's being booed. Now, what's happening?
She's saying, Mrs. Spiffy is
Poor
getting
Mrs.
mad.
Spiffy.
And it's going out. And the curtain's going down.
That's it. That's the end of the play.
Yeah, that was
Very
good.
Boston, on the northeastern seaboard of the United States, is one of the country's major centers for technological research. Only Silicon Valley on the west can rival Boston. The Massachusetts Institute for Technology is here, Harvard University, Biogen, Biotech, and many other organizations involved in genetic engineering, the Digital Equipment Corporation, Hewlett-Packard, and of course, Polaroid. Well, for some 40 years now, the Polaroid Corporation has been involved and known throughout the world with instant pictures like this. But for the past few years, they've been diversifying, and at the moment, their vision research laboratories are experimenting with a revolutionary new form of digital imaging.
The process involves taking an original image or picture, which may be a photograph or something which has been painted, drawn, or whatever, putting it up on a TV screen, and then beginning to play around with it and modify it. But the key to the system is how it gets to the TV screen in the first place.
Well, a regular photograph, like this one, or this one here, contains something like 100 million pieces of information about the light, the color, the density, and so on, of the images that it portrays. Now, it's a well-established technique to pick up the information on a picture like this and with a Vidicon tube and portray it on a television screen. But what they can now also do is to pick that information up on something called a drum scanner, which converts it into digital information and then stores it in a large memory bank. Now, a normal television screen can display something like 1 million pieces of information. This is a high-quality studio monitor that can portray about 5 million pieces of information, but that's still far short of the 100 million that exist in the main memory. So what the operator does is to work with an image on the screen that is actually an average, if you like, of the more complete information that exists in the main memory. But because it's digital information, she has enormous control over what can be displayed on the screen. So with a few punches of the keyboard, a little cursor appears on the screen, like that. And also you get 1 degree of enlargement. And then by moving the cursor around, you can find a place that you might want to enlarge, and then just press the buttons here. There's 4 buttons, and it'll enlarge it 1 time. Then you can move the cursor around if you like to somewhere else and enlarge it again. It's exactly 2 times magnification with each jump, but the system has the capacity to do that 9 times, and that's effectively a magnification of 500, which will in fact fill the screen with a single pixel. And even when it's not as big a magnification as that, you can still do things with it. For instance, if we move the cursor around to pick up a square, the operator can start to manipulate the square by changing it. Let's try changing the color to black. And then, if I pull the magnification back again, you can see what a difference that 1 black square makes. Now what this means is that by manipulating a picture at so basic a level, it can be changed in such a high definition way that it's impossible to tell that those changes have been made artificially. The principles being developed by Polaroid have been incorporated into this equipment produced by the Cytex Corporation and demonstrated here at the Acme Printing Company in Boston. When this photograph was taken originally, the girl's toenails were not painted. The colors were added like this, and they can be changed equally easily. To the lower definition memory, the picture might look like this. But when it's fed into the high definition memory, it comes back like this. But also, when this picture was taken originally, it didn't have the Acme logo on it. It was put on digitally. And it can be removed just as easily. Drops of water can be put in the space left by the erased logo by simply picking up existing drops of water and duplicating them a few centimeters away. The potential for the system goes a lot further than that. Operators say they can take a group photograph, for instance, and rearrange the people's heads on different shoulders in such perfect detail it would be impossible to tell a change had been made. It makes you wonder. A picture may still be worth 1,000 words, but what about that old saying, the camera never lies?
History rewritten. George Orwell, how right you were in choosing 1984 as the title for your book. You'll just have to believe that this head belongs to this body. Kidney stones are not only an extremely painful condition, but their removal by surgery is disabling. Next, on Towards 2000, the use of sonic waves to painlessly explode those kidney stones within the body. Air pollution can occur at all levels of our atmosphere, and accurately monitoring it is vital. A job made less difficult by the use of lasers. They've been described as magic bullets, biological torpedoes able to locate and destroy cancer and other diseases of the body. They're called monoclonal antibodies, and they'll be taking an important role in the medicine of tomorrow. That's it then until next week. From Towards 2000, good night.
And flowers. Ah, the Egyptians always had flowers in their coffins.
So now that we have buried Ramesses the Pharaoh and Ramesses the doll, let's get back to the story, shall we? Do you remember? The voice in the burning bush had spoken to Moses and told him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. So Moses had returned to his people, and he had told them what God had said to him. and the Israelites believed him. Then Moses went to Pharaoh and said to him, I am sent to you by the God of my people. God says that you must free the Israelites and let them leave this country. But Pharaoh paid no attention, and far from letting them go, he made the Israelites work harder than ever. Make them sweat, he said to his soldiers, and don't bother to give them any straw for their bricks. Let them find their own straw. That will teach them a lesson. Then Moses went back to Pharaoh. You must let the Israelites go, he said, for if you don't, we will turn the waters of the Nile into blood. Pharaoh laughed at him. That's impossible. Do you take me for a fool? But Moses struck the Nile with his rod, and it happened just as God had said it would. The river turned to blood. The fish started to die, and the water was so foul that no one could drink it. Then God said to Moses again, go back to Pharaoh, Moses, and ask him again. Tell him that this time, if he says no, I will send a plague of frogs. So Moses did as he was told, and when Pharaoh once again refused to let them go, frogs started to pop up throughout their land. They were everywhere. Frogs in the streets, frogs in the houses, frogs in the royal palace, frogs in the royal bed. They were everywhere. Pharaoh was appalled. He said to Moses, you must get rid of them. Tell your God to send them away, and I will let your people go. So Moses prayed to God to get rid of the frogs. And sure enough, the frogs disappeared. But the Pharaoh's word was not to be trusted. When he saw that the frogs had all gone, he changed his mind and still refused to let the children of Israel go. Next, God sent a plague of lice. And after that, there was a plague of flies. The flies carried disease so that all the cattle began to die. And the Egyptians were struck down with painful boils. But still Pharaoh would not let the people go. So Moses raised his arms to heaven, and the Lord said in thunder and lightning and hail. And after that, a dense swarm of insects settled in the country. The insects were things called locusts, which ate every green thing in the land, all the corn in the fields and the leaves and the trees. The farmers were ruined. And Pharaoh's servants begged him to let the Israelites go, but still Pharaoh said, nope. So Moses stretched out his hand again, and a thick darkness covered the entire land. This time, said Moses, there will be great sorrow in Egypt. The angel of death will pass through the land, and the eldest child of each Egyptian family shall die. Please listen to me, Pharaoh, or you will be sorry. But the Pharaoh's ears were deaf, and that night the last and the most terrible of the plagues arrived. The Israelites were unharmed, but the Egyptians died by the hundreds, and among the Egyptian dead was the eldest son of the Pharaoh. The foolish Pharaoh had paid for his pride, and now at last he gave in. Take your people, he said to Moses, take your people and go. I never want to see you in Egypt again. So the children of Israel rose up and left, and Moses led them into the desert.
Poor old Pharaoh. Still, he really only had himself to blame. He shouldn't have been so stubborn. Now, come and have a look at my wall painting. It's a painting of the 10 plagues. Now, you could do a frieze like this. Do 1 plague each, and then join all the pictures up in a row. Now, look, here I've got the locusts. There they are. And here's a thunderstorm. Look at that lightning. And here's an Egyptian covered in boils, poor thing. And look, there's the flies, and the dead cattle, and the frogs, and blood in the river. That's where the picture begins.
And that's where our song begins as well. There was blood in the river and frogs in the bed, lice in the clothes and lice on the heads, and Moses said, let my people go. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, listen to me, you must set my people free. But Pharaoh, Pharaoh, he said no.
Next came swarms of flies a-flying, and the cattle and the goats and the sheep lay a-dying, and Moses said, let my people go.
Pharaoh, Pharaoh, listen to me, you must set my people free. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, he said no.
Next came boils, next came pain, next came lightning, hail and rain, and Moses said, let my people go.
And then the locusts stripped the farmers bare, it was dark as night everywhere, and Moses said, let my people go.
Pharaoh, Pharaoh, listen to me, you must set my people free. But Pharaoh, Pharaoh still said no.
Then the angel of death reached out his hand and touched the Egyptian firstborn, and Moses said, let my people go. And when he saw his son lie dead, the Pharaoh bowed his stubborn head. And now at last he said to Moses, go.
Moses, Moses, listen to me, I will set your people free. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, he said go. Moses, Moses, listen to me, I will set your people free. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, he said go.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Standing in that silent hall, waiting for that final call, says he doesn't